Keefe, joined now by investigator Andy Parati. Andy, this is one of my favorite stories. You and I have known each other for a very long time, worked together for about a decade now. But this story spans decades and also is very relevant to now. And I'm just going to set it up with one phrase that we're about to hear, which is, don't eat where you poop, or don't poop where you eat.
Right, which was a soundbite that I never expected when I first was going to tell this story, until I sat down with an attorney representing someone that I did not expect when I also was looking into this story. This story has a lot of twists and turns, including the main woman that we interviewed, who surprised me in the middle of our interview about something that she wrote about 20 years ago that may have foreshadowed a potential environmental disaster.
Ever since I was a little kid, I have been writing.
Colleen Brooks combs through old newspapers.
It's one of my favorite players.
Where she contributed as a columnist in Calhoun, Georgia for more than 30 years.
I probably wrote 10,000 maybe.
Covering everything from romance,
yes,
movies, and the weather.
On April 22nd, 1988, A Snow Lover's Lament.
Today, she's lamenting about another story making headlines, not as its author, but as an alleged victim of a potential environmental disaster. This past May, she and dozens of her neighbors filed a lawsuit claiming the city of Calhoun contaminated their drinking water with a cancer-causing toxin. According to the suit, the city spread 28,000 tons of sewage or sludge in fields near their homes with high concentrations of a chemical called PFAS, known as forever chemicals, seeping into their land and wells for more than 20 years. According to this city permit, one of the sludge fields used Colleen's home address.
I thought, wait a minute. You know, they can't do that. They didn't ask us. Nobody came up and knocked on my door and said, can we have permission to use your address for this sludge field that we're dumping out here? Oh, no. No.
How did the toxin get into the sewage? The lawsuit claims the city allowed industrial wastewater from carpet manufacturers that use PFAS to flow into Calhoun's sewage treatment plant. The chemicals are then mixed with the sludge and later dumped on land along the Coosawattee River, where the city draws its drinking water.
They put sludge upriver, right next to a river, from where they pull the drinking water.
Heath Brooks is the lawyer who filed the lawsuit on behalf of the residents.
We've known this for as long as human beings have been here. You don't poop where you drink. And that's what the city did. They put it right next to their intakes. And so they polluted their own city.
The issue is personal for Heath. Colleen isn't just a client. She's his mother.
Did you ever think in your wildest dreams you'd be representing your own parents in a lawsuit?
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. No, I didn't. I didn't in my wildest nightmare think that I'd be representing my parents and my aunts and my uncle and the people that I grew up with along this road. They can't jump into a swimming pool because their swimming pools are filled with the water from a polluted well. They can't go out and use their wells to water their garden because their gardens are polluted.
This past April, the Environmental Protection Agency set PFAS limits in drinking water to 4 parts per trillion. Water samples taken by the attorney from 5 Calhoun homes show levels ranging from 70 parts per trillion to more than 8,000. Dr. David Andrews is with the Environmental Working Group and has years of experience in PFAS research. When you hear those numbers, what goes through your mind?
Those are shockingly high and incredibly concerning and indicate the extreme levels of contamination.
While the impact to residents' health is unclear, a city nearby could offer a glimpse of what's to come. Later this summer, Emory University will launch an exposure study to test hundreds of residents for PFAS in Rome, Georgia. Its study in direct response to an Atlanta News First investigation last year that tested residents' blood, uncovering elevated levels of the toxin in nearly every participant.
We didn't know that this issue existed before your study.
Emory University lead scientist Dr. Dana Barr.
In thinking back, it should have been very intuitive that there was going to be an issue because of all the carpet industry and the use of PFAS as stain repellents and water repellents and things like that. We just didn't really know about the issue before then.
Attorneys for Calhoun declined to comment on the lawsuit, but in court documents claim the city is a victim too, filing suit against carpet manufacturers that allegedly contaminated the river used for drinking water located upstream in Dalton, Georgia, a city that proudly proclaims itself the carpet capital of the world.
Well, it seems as if one of our government agencies has gone and done it again.
Someone had a gut feeling there was a potential problem years before anyone else.
Yeah, I remember that now.
It was Colleen. She wrote about it in this 2004 column titled Spreading It Around, after witnessing city trucks spray something on fields across from her home for years.
I've been told that this stuff has been treated, so it's okay. Treated with what? Chemicals? I wrote about it, and I questioned it.
20 years ago, you wrote about this.
Yeah, and I didn't know what it was.
Colleen says she spoke to someone at City Hall, but can't remember who.
They told me that it was perfectly safe and that it was good for the land. And I thought, dumping that smelly, not right stuff could not possibly be right for this land. What I really feel is betrayed.
So Andy, this again is very relevant now, even though it's something that has spanned many, many years. Is anyone actively looking into this right now?
So in addition to this lawsuit, another lawsuit is now pending against the city. The Southern Environmental Law Center filed a lawsuit against the city. Its lawsuit seeks to force the city to clean up all the mess that it allegedly has been doing to the land and to residents' wells for years.
You know, what's fascinating to me, because this is behind the investigation, I always want to know, did you know going into the interview that this reporter had actually covered this story? Or was it a surprise that you learned along with the viewers?
It was a complete surprise. I was sitting next to her. First, I just learned the day before that I was going to be interviewing the attorney's mother. And when I arrived, I then learned that she was a former columnist in Calhoun for a number of years. And then in the middle of the interview, she says, oh yeah, and by the way, I wrote about it. I was like, what do you mean you wrote about it? 20 years ago, I wrote about the city dumping sludge, something on fields across from my home and across the county for years. And that just stopped me in my tracks. I reset my thinking of exactly how I was going to tell the story, and I wanted to learn more about what she potentially knew all those years ago.
You know, a less experienced reporter would have started with that, would have said, a reporter who once covered this story, you know, is now dealing with the aftermath of these questions. Instead, you held it back and revealed it. You also held back and revealed that the attorney who was filing the lawsuit on her behalf was her son. I thought it was brilliant storytelling because it kept the viewer engaged. And you know, there's this misnomer that we're supposed to tell everything up front. Mm-hmm. Great storytellers, when you're telling a story to a family member or a friend, you tell it in a way that has a series of reveals. And that's the way you told this story. When you're writing it, was it difficult because you kind of know as the omniscient storyteller what's coming? Is it difficult to write that kind of story?
It is. In fact, I originally wrote it the way that you said an inexperienced writer or journalist might write it. I wrote it at the very top going, here's this woman that wrote about something 20 years ago. And then when I sort of like laid it out and took a day and came back to the script, I said, no. This is something that we need to share towards the end to really make an impact of how coincidental and crazy this whole situation happened.
And it's not disingenuous because you were genuinely surprised in the interview. So I'm always we have these, and I can't say the profane word, we always have these holy bleep moments when we find a document or learn something new. I always want the viewer to have the same reaction. You know, why water it down? Why sort of, you know, structure it like it's some AP style television story instead of let's bring the viewer on a sort of journey of discovery. And you did that so well. This issue is really important in part because when the reporter asked the question back then, even as a homeowner, she said, well, why are you doing this? Well, it's good for the fields. It's good for the soil. I mean, is there any truth to that, absent the chemicals that were present?
You know, for years, municipalities, water utilities have sold their sludge to farmers to use as fertilizer. So that maybe not is as surprising, maybe to some people in rural areas, maybe to people in the city or people just not familiar with how that stuff works. So I think what was surprising and was potentially unknown is exactly what was in the sludge, what was combined with the sludge, and that's what the residents are saying. The city should have known, knowing that it was allowing municipal waste to enter into its own municipal waste, and then eventually having that PFAS, allegedly those high levels of PFAS mixed in with the sludge and eventually spread for years. Tons and tons of this on land, and they say seeping into their water wells.
You know, and because these are forever chemicals, they're not broken down. It's not like there's a natural decomposition process. So other kinds of things in that sludge might have been broken down by normal bacterial sort of, decomposition, but that doesn't happen with PFAS, which is the real danger, and it builds up in your system because your system doesn't process it. Your kidneys don't filter it out. It just accumulates in your body, right?
Right, and that's why Emory University is going to be conducting that exposure study that we mentioned in the piece in direct response to our own testing when we reached out to the state health department saying, hey, we now know of a documented community that has been exposed to this PFAS, to this toxin for years. Are you going to try to measure the impact? That's the whole reason why I started looking into this. Knowing that the state had known about this exposure for years, I just wanted to answer one question. How did this impact residents? And as you know, some of the best investigations simply start with a very simple question. Why? Or how? And that's what we ultimately did in trying to get at least answers for 11 individuals that we profiled, and the majority of them, we've now learned that all of their PFAS levels in their blood were higher than the national median. And what the Calhoun residents want, they want the same answers. So when Emory University found the funding for the exposure study, while it was looking for funding, it learned about the lawsuit that the Southern Environmental Law Center filed, identifying potential high levels of PFAS exposure in Calhoun, which is just north of Rome. And because of that, they're now going to expand that exposure study to include Calhoun residents. And I spoke by email with the lead professor over that exposure study, and she said that already they already have all the slots filled, which in my response to her was, well, that shows the number of people that want answers and the interest in knowing how this impacted their community. And she said, absolutely.
Well, you're always too humble to take credit. You say they're doing this testing and they're expanding this testing. To be fair, none of this would have happened without your investigative reporting. And I know that it's a partnership, but had you not exposed this, and also if Atlanta News First had not fronted the money for the initial testing, along with the partnership with the testing company, we wouldn't be here.
Right, and I have to give credit to the people who actually volunteered and to give their blood and test. It's not necessarily something that a lot of people want to do, but because they were genuinely concerned and they had questions, they were able to really give us some really great data. And that data was then used by Emory University to find the funding to get this exposure study going.
We have a saying in our unit, solve, help, expose. This does all of those things. You exposed it, you are helping people there, and you're helping to solve the problem. And this is the best example of investigative reporting. Also, a lot of times there's this hard and fast rule where we're not the story. But that doesn't mean we can't make things happen as journalists by asking the questions how and why. You've actually spurred change, and hats off to you. Excellent reporting, Andy. And I know also you live by the mantra of one good investigation leads to another, and this story certainly is an example of that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for Behind the Investigation. For Andy Parati, I'm Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe with Atlanta News First Investigates. You can catch this wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, or on Atlanta News First Plus. We'll see you next time.